What's up everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a highly requested and incredibly challenging benchmark. As the owner of this channel, my goal is always to bring you the most honest, detailed, and brutal hardware tests available. We are pushing the absolute limits of budget hardware to answer a question that many gamers have been asking. Can you realistically play one of the most demanding battle royales on the market with entry-level, older generation components? Specifically, we are testing Call of Duty Warzone, and we are running it on the infamous NVIDIA GT 1030, paired with the classic Intel Core i5-6500. If you watched my previous benchmarks testing other competitive shooters, you already know that this CPU and GPU combination can be highly unpredictable. While older games hold their ground thanks to engine optimization, Warzone is an entirely different beast. It features massive open maps, highly detailed textures, and a staggering player count that stresses every single component in your PC. Before we jump into the numbers and the gameplay footage, please don't forget to comment and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and it lets me know that you want to see more extreme budget benchmarks just like this one. Before recording, I read through Reddit threads and user reviews to see what the community genuinely expects from this setup. The consensus is pretty brutal. Reviewers point out that while this 30-watt graphics card is an amazing upgrade for standard office PCs, it is simply not designed for heavy AAA titles. Reddit users are highly vocal about the severe 2GB VRAM limit, noting the game barely gets above 30 FPS, even at a heavily downscaled 720p resolution. Others debated if the i5-6500's 4 cores would handle the massive map geometry, or just choke completely under the immense pressure, resulting in a stuttering, unresponsive mess. As for our processor, modern battle royales heavily rely on multi-threading to track up to 150 players, fast-moving vehicles, and advanced physics. Because the GT 1030 only has 2 GB of VRAM, it cannot store enough map data locally, constantly asking the i5-6500 for more. This creates a massive bottleneck loop. The processor hits 100% utilization, causing your frame time graphs to look like an erratic heartbeat monitor. This is exactly why you experience heavy micro-stutters. It's a fascinating technical limitation to observe, but a complete nightmare to actually play through. To make this test as fair as possible, we closed all background applications and set the game to high priority in Windows. But unfortunately, no amount of software tweaking can physically solder more VRAM onto your graphics card. So let us finally look at the gameplay footage and see exactly how this rig performs. Starting things off at the absolute lowest visual configuration possible. When testing Call of Duty Warzone on a GT 1030 paired with an Intel i5-6500, the results were quite limited, just as the internet predicted. On low settings, the video quality is very poor. The game looks incredibly muddy and washed out. The textures on the buildings lack fine detail, and the shadows are virtually non-existent or heavily pixelated. When you first jump out of the cargo plane, the engine tries to render the entire sprawling map all at once. The massive points of interest completely overwhelm the 2 GB of VRAM. It takes several seconds for the geometry to even load in properly. But the game reaches around 25 FPS. Is 25 frames per second ideal? Absolutely not. In a fast-paced, highly competitive shooter, 25 FPS puts you at a massive disadvantage. You will feel a noticeable, heavy delay between moving your physical mouse and your on-screen character actually aiming down the sights. Tracking a moving target feels almost impossible. However, it is running. The i5-6500 is working incredibly hard, sweating to feed instructions to the GPU, but the GT 1030 is fully maxed out at 100% utilization. The 2 GB of video memory are instantly saturated the very moment your boots hit the dirt. Moving on, we decided to step things up a notch to see if we could recover some visual fidelity without completely breaking the game. Switching to medium settings definitely brings some much-needed life back into the map. The lighting behaves a bit more naturally, weapons have a realistic gleam, and you can actually distinguish individual leaves on the trees. However, this visual improvement comes at a heavy cost. The performance takes a significant hit, dropping closer to the 18 to 20 FPS range, with frequent jarring dips even lower during intense action-packed moments. Whether you're playing on low or medium, the core performance issues are extremely noticeable. The most glaring, game-breaking issue we found is the incredibly slow texture loading. Because the graphics card doesn't have enough VRAM to store all the high-quality assets, it constantly has to swap data back and forth with your system's slower RAM. When changing weapons or quickly picking up a new assault rifle from a supply box, the 3D model takes an agonizingly long time to appear. You will literally be running around holding an invisible gun, aiming down invisible iron sights, hoping the textures pop in before an enemy spots you. It completely breaks the immersion, and it gets you killed more often than not. Let's move to the middle ground. After hours of tweaking and adjusting sliders, we tried to find a custom configuration that wouldn't turn the gameplay into a slideshow. If there were absolutely no other option, the most playable compromise would be the balanced settings preset. Under this specific preset, the graphics remain relatively low quality, but the game engine seems to handle the background resource allocation just a little bit better. The game runs at roughly 20 FPS consistently, which feels a tiny bit more stable than the erratic jumping frame pacing we saw on medium. It is, at the very least, somewhat manageable. If you adapt your playstyle to be incredibly passive, hold your angles inside buildings, and avoid driving vehicles across the map, you can actually survive. Driving a vehicle is one of the absolute worst things you can do on this setup, because moving quickly forces the game engine to stream in new areas rapidly, which brings the GT 1030 to its absolute knees, dropping you to 10 FPS or worse. The i5-6500 handles the bullet physics and the player tracking decently enough here, preventing the game from completely crashing. But make no mistake, any close quarters combat where multiple enemy squads are throwing smoke grenades and firing automatic weapons simultaneously will drop your frames straight into the single digits. It's a playable compromise, but only for the most patient gamers out there. Now for the true stress test. We threw caution to the wind and cranked the visual sliders up, pushing the GT 1030 far beyond its intended design limits. At ultra settings, the game genuinely looks beautiful. You can clearly see the intricate details on the operator skins. The reflections in the water are sharp, and the volumetric lighting is actually quite impressive to look at. But the performance is completely and utterly destroyed. The frame rate tanks heavily to around 15 FPS, and the input lag is astronomical. Moving the camera feels like you're dragging your physical mouse through thick, heavy mud. The 1% low frame rates are practically sitting at 0, meaning the game completely freezes for half a second every single time a new high-resolution texture needs to load. If you try to aim down the scope of a heavy sniper rifle, the zoom animation stutters so badly that your target will be in a completely different area code by the time your crosshair settles in. The engine literally fails to synchronize the visual data with the physics because the processor and graphics card are locked in a constant, devastating traffic jam. It's a fantastic way to capture a static screenshot for a thumbnail, but absolutely impossible to play. Finally, we pushed the engine to its absolute breaking point. Switching to extreme settings improves visual quality to the maximum the engine allows, rendering every shadow and texture at peak fidelity, yet the frame rate drops to an abysmal 12 to 15 FPS on average. At this stage, saying that making gameplay very difficult is a massive understatement. It's an exercise in pure, unadulterated frustration. The card is screaming for mercy, running constantly at its maximum thermal threshold, and the slow texture loading issue is magnified tenfold here. You'll drop into a hot zone, and the massive concrete buildings will literally not render their solid walls for a good 10 to 15 seconds. You can sometimes see through the geometry of the entire map, simply because the poor 2 GB of VRAM are entirely suffocated by the massive texture file sizes. So, what is the final verdict of this grueling benchmark? The internet reviews and forum warnings were absolutely right. The NVIDIA GT 1030, even when paired with a historically highly capable quad-core CPU like the i5-6500, is just not equipped for the massive, demanding, and chaotic world of Call of Duty Warzone. The sheer lack of video memory is a solid brick wall you simply cannot climb over, no matter how much you lower your resolution. As I always say on this channel, it's incredibly fun to push old hardware to its limits to see exactly what it can still do. But sometimes the modern gaming landscape simply demands more horsepower to deliver a playable experience. Thank you to everyone who requested this specific benchmark and stuck around to see the brutal results. Let me know in the comments below what crazy, outdated hardware combination we should torture test next. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.